When the stage lights went down, nobody could believe it. What Elton John did that night. The crowd of 55,000 people waited in breathless silence. October 1976, Dodger Stadium, Los Angeles. The greatest rock spectacle anyone had ever seen. Elton John stood at the piano in a sequined Dodgers uniform, his fingers trembling over the keys. But when those stage lights finally went down, something happened that would haunt him for decades. Something nobody in that stadium could have imagined. You see, what the world saw that night was pure magic. What they didn't see was a man drowning. Let me take you back to that warm October evening. The air smelled of hot dogs and anticipation. Fans had been lining up since dawn, some camping overnight just to get close to the stage. These weren't just concert goers. These were witnesses to history. Elton John had sold more albums than the Beatles that year. His face was on every magazine cover. His songs played on every radio station from New York to San Francisco. Don't Go Breaking My Heart with Kiki D had just hit number 1. He was, without question, the biggest star on planet Earth. But success has a price. And Elton was about to pay it in full. The day started like any other touring day. Wake up in a hotel room that looked exactly like the one from the night before. Room service breakfast that tasted like cardboard. A phone call from his manager, John Reid, reminding him of the schedule. Sound check at 3. Meet and greet at 5. Showtime at 7:30. The machine never stopped. It just kept grinding, day after day, city after city, year after year. Elton had been on the road for 7 years straight. 7 years without a real break. 7 years of living out of suitcases, sleeping in different beds, waking up not knowing what city he was in. His body was exhausted, his voice was strained, but worst of all, his soul was empty. Nobody knew this, of course. How could they? The man they saw on stage was larger than life. The costumes got bigger and more outrageous with each tour. The glasses more elaborate. The performances more spectacular. He was a hurricane of glitter and sequins and pure showmanship. Captain Fantastic, they called him. And he played the part perfectly. But behind those oversized glasses, behind that $1,000,000 smile, there was a young man from Pinner, England, who just wanted to go home. His real name was Reginald Kenneth Dwight. Born in 1947 to a cold, distant father and a mother who loved him but didn't quite understand him. He'd learned to play piano at 3 years old. By 11, he'd won a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music. By 23, he'd changed his name to Elton Hercules John and started writing songs with a poet named Bennie, who would become his lifelong collaborator and best friend. The success came fast, almost too fast. Your Song in 1970. Rocketman in 1972. Crocodile Rock, Daniel, Bennie and the Jets, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Hit after hit after hit. By 1975, Elton John had 5 albums in the American Top 40 simultaneously. 5 albums. Nobody had ever done that before. Not Elvis. Not the Beatles. Nobody. But here's what nobody talks about. Here's what the magazine covers and the gold records in the sold-out stadiums couldn't show you. Elton was falling apart. The pressure was crushing him. Every album had to be better than the last. Every concert had to be more spectacular. Every costume had to be more outrageous. The fans wanted Captain Fantastic, so that's what he gave them. Night after night after night. But Reginald Kenneth Dwight? That shy boy from Pinner? He was disappearing. And then there was the loneliness. Oh, the loneliness. Surrounded by thousands of people every single night, and he'd never felt more alone in his entire life. His relationship with John Reid was complicated, volatile, sometimes violent. His friendships felt transactional. Everyone wanted something from him. A photo, an autograph, a piece of his time, a piece of his soul. He was 29 years old and he felt like an old man. So he started using anything he could find to numb the pain. Cocaine. Lots of it. Alcohol. Mountains of it. Whatever it took to get through another day, another show, another interview where he had to smile and pretend everything was wonderful. But here's the thing about masks. Eventually, they become so heavy you can't hold them up anymore. October 25, 1976. The day before the Dodger Stadium concerts. Elton was in his hotel suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Bennie was there. John Reid was there. Some other people whose names don't matter. They were celebrating. Tomorrow night would be the pinnacle of Elton's career. 2 sold-out shows at Dodger Stadium. Over 100,000 people. The biggest concerts of his life. But Elton wasn't celebrating. He was in the bathroom, staring at himself in the mirror, and he didn't recognize the person looking back at him. His hands were shaking. Not from nerves. From withdrawal. He'd been using cocaine every day for months. His nose was damaged. His heart raced even when he was sitting still. His weight had ballooned from stress, eating, and alcohol. The sequined costumes that had fit perfectly 6 months ago now strained at the seams. He splashed cold water on his face and tried to pull himself together. Just 2 more shows, he told himself. Just get through 2 more shows. Then you can rest. Then you can figure out what to do with your life. But deep down, he knew the truth. There would never be rest. There would always be another tour, another album, another obligation. The machine would keep grinding until there was nothing left of him. That's when he made a decision. A decision that nobody in that hotel suite could have predicted. A decision that would shock the entire music industry. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened that night at Dodger Stadium first. October 26, 1976. 7:30 in the evening. The stadium gates opened and the crowd flooded in like a tidal wave. They came from all over California, all over America, some from as far as Europe and Asia. This wasn't just a concert. This was a cultural event. This was history being made. The stage was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Massive, elaborate, designed by Elton himself. There were platforms and ramps and lights and pyrotechnics. In the center, a grand piano covered in rhinestones. And behind it all, a backdrop that read, Elton John, Dodger Stadium, in letters 10 feet tall. Billie Jean King was there. Cary Grant was there. Elizabeth Taylor was there. Half of Hollywood had shown up. The other half was probably stuck in traffic trying to get there. Backstage, Elton sat in his dressing room, staring at his costume. The sequined Dodgers uniform, number 1 on the back. Custom made, covered in crystals, weighing nearly 30 pounds. It was beautiful. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. His hands were still shaking. John Reid knocked on the door. 15 minutes, he said. Elton nodded but didn't speak. What was there to say? He'd done this 1,000 times before. Walk out, sit at the piano, play the songs, make them scream, make them cry, make them forget their problems for 2 hours. That was the job. That's what they paid for. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt final. He stood up, took one last look in the mirror, adjusted his glasses, enormous things, shaped like stars, covered in lights, and walked toward the stage. The crowd heard him coming before they saw him. The opening notes of your song started playing through the massive speaker system. And then the lights came up and there he was. Elton John, Captain Fantastic, the biggest star in the world. The roar was deafening. 55,000 people on their feet, screaming, crying, holding up signs, throwing flowers onto the stage. The energy was electric. It was overwhelming. It was everything any performer could ever dream of. And Elton felt absolutely nothing. He sat at the piano and started playing. His fingers moved automatically, muscle memory taking over. He'd played these songs so many times he could do them in his sleep. And in a way, that's exactly what he was doing. Sleepwalking through his own life. But something strange started to happen about halfway through the show. Something he didn't expect. He looked out at the crowd, really looked at them for the first time in months, and he saw their faces. Young couples holding hands, parents with their children on their shoulders, teenagers singing every word, old folks swaying to the music with tears in their eyes. They weren't just fans. They were people, real people with real lives and real problems. And for 2 hours on this warm October night, his music was making them happy. His music was giving them hope. His music was helping them forget whatever pain they were carrying. And suddenly, Elton felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Purpose. Not the manufactured purpose of selling albums and filling stadiums. But real purpose. Human purpose. Connection. He played Rocketman and watched a father lift his little boy onto his shoulders so he could see better. He played Tiny Dancer and saw a young couple slow dancing in the aisle. He played Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me and noticed an elderly woman in the front row with tears streaming down her face, mouthing every word. These people didn't care about Captain Fantastic. They cared about the music. They cared about the way his songs made them feel. They cared about the connection, the shared experience, the magic of being part of something bigger than themselves. And for the first time in years, Elton understood why he'd started making music in the first place. Not for the fame, not for the money, for these moments, for these connections. But here's what you need to understand. This realization didn't make him happy. It made him devastated. Because he absolutely knew, that he couldn't keep doing this. Not like this, not at this pace, not with the drugs and the alcohol and the constant pressure and the loneliness. He was going to die if he didn't stop. Maybe not physically, though that was possible too. But spiritually, emotionally, he would die. The part of him that made the music meaningful would disappear forever. So when he played the final song of the night, a 20-minute version of Bennie and the Jets that brought the house down, he made his decision. The crowd was on its feet. The applause was thunderous. They were screaming for an encore. They always screamed for an encore. And normally, Elton would come back out and play 3 or 4 more songs. Give them everything they wanted. Leave them wanting more. But not tonight. Tonight, Elton stood up from the piano, walked to the front of the stage, and did something nobody expected. He took off his star-shaped glasses. Now, you have to understand. Elton never took off his glasses on stage. Never. They were part of the costume, part of the character, part of the armor that protected vulnerable Reginald from the overwhelming demands of being Elton John. But he took them off. And he stood there, in front of 55,000 people, without his mask. The stadium got quiet. Not completely silent, but quiet enough that you could feel something was different. Something was wrong. Or maybe something was finally right. And then Elton spoke. No microphone. No rehearsed speech. Just raw, honest words. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, he said, his voice cracking slightly. This has been the most wonderful, most magical, most important night of my career. But I need to tell you something. The crowd held its breath. I'm tired, he said simply. I'm so very tired, and I need to rest. There was confusion in the stadium. Murmuring. People turning to each other, trying to understand what was happening. I'm not retiring, Elton continued. I could never stop making music. But I need to step away from all this for a while. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not wearing these costumes and these glasses. I need to find Reggie again. Some people in the crowd started crying. Others looked shocked. A few looked angry, like they'd been betrayed. But most people understood. Because most people, at some point in their lives, have felt exactly what Elton was feeling. That bone-deep exhaustion. That sense of losing yourself in the role everyone expects you to play. That desperate need to just stop and breathe and remember who you really are. Thank you for your music, someone shouted from the crowd. No, Elton said, putting his glasses back on. Thank you for listening. And then he walked off the stage. Backstage was chaos. John Reid was furious. There was another show tomorrow. There were contracts. There were commitments. There were millions of dollars at stake. What the hell was Elton thinking? But Elton wasn't thinking. For the first time in years, he was feeling. And what he felt was relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. He did the second show the next night. October 27, 1976. Another 55,000 people. Another spectacular performance. But this time, he played differently. Lighter. Freer. Because he knew it wasn't forever. He knew there was an end point. And when that show was over, when the last note faded and the crowd finally went home, Elton John got on a plane and disappeared. He didn't release another album for 2 years. He didn't tour for nearly 3. He went to therapy. He dealt with his addictions. He worked on his relationships. He learned how to be Reggie again, so that Elton could exist in a healthier way. The media said he'd burned out. They said he was finished. They said he'd never recapture the magic. They were wrong. When Elton came back in 1979, he came back stronger. Healthier. More authentic. The success continued. The hits kept coming. But this time, he was in control. This time, he knew when to say no. This time, he understood that taking care of himself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. That night at Dodger Stadium was the moment everything changed. Not because of what the crowd saw, but because of what Elton saw. He saw himself clearly for the first time in years. And he saw that he had a choice. He could keep going until he destroyed himself, or he could pause, breathe, and remember why he started making music in the first place. He chose himself. And that choice saved his life. Looking back now, nearly 50 years later, Elton John calls those Dodger Stadium shows the most important concerts of his career. Not because they were the biggest or the best, but because they were the moment he stopped being Captain Fantastic and started being human again. The man who walked off that stage in October 1976 was broken. But sometimes things need to break before they can be put back together stronger than before. And that's exactly what happened. The stage lights went down that night, and nobody could believe what Elton John did. But maybe, just maybe, it was the bravest thing he'd ever done. Sometimes the most courageous act isn't pushing forward. It's having the strength to stop.